What is up, my friend? Welcome back to the basement. I am Mikey Ehlinger, and this is Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Thank you so much for being here, what I think is the best doggone fantasy football podcast in Franklin, Wisconsin. This is episode 17, and to start it off, we have a Common Cause, a Session Pale Ale by Enlightened Brewery. If you're listening to this on podcast, you can't see me showing it off to the lovely viewers on YouTube. But yeah, Common Cause by Enlightened Brewery, Session Pale Ale. One drink, everybody knows the rules. That's a shout out to you, Dave Portnoy, which I know no chance you're listening to this, but Pale Ale. I have a love-hate relationship with Pale Ales, but this is one of the better ones that I've had, and no, I'm not saying that because I just love all things Enlightened Brewery. This is definitely one of the better pale ales that I've had. If you don't know, Enlightened Brewery has my favorite beer on the planet. It's called Cream City Bricks. I partially love it because it's the color of the can matches perfectly with the Milwaukee Bucks Cream City uniforms. But anyway, Enlightened Brewery is probably my favorite brewery in all of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So if you are ever in the area, let me know or do yourself a favor and make the time to get over to Enlightened Brewery. And no, this is not a paid advertisement, by the way. That's how much I love the beer and everything that they're doing over there. And it's just a cool little brewery, a cool little hangout spot. So if you ever get a chance, if you're ever in Milwaukee, Enlightened Brewery, check it out. But yeah. Episode 17, and tonight when I say tonight, by the way, it's 10:17 p.m. on Tuesday, the 24th. I'm pretty exhausted, but I wanted to get this thing out for you guys. I know, Tuesday is obviously waiver wire day, and I like to think of the waiver wire as two parts. There's waiver wire, and then there's Wake Early Wednesday, which is actually what I basically title my article when I write my waiver wire stuff every single week. But episode 17 of the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football Podcast is going to dive into the Week 8 waiver wire. We are going to talk about my waiver wire philosophy, which I am quite frugal when it comes to spending priority, spending free agent money. I have 29 different players and defenses in my list this week. We're not going to cover all of them here in this episode. But if you are curious and you want to hear more or see more, all you have to do is go over to basementbrewedff.com and click on content. It's a completely free article. It's a free piece, no cost to it. But there's 29 different players and defenses, 4 of which I believe are possibly worth using waiver wire priority on. And the other 25 aren't worth using a priority on, but they're players and defenses that I would consider adding to my lineup after waivers run and waivers clear. So we're going to cover a few here today. The rest are completely free on the website. And if you're like me and you do podcasts while you're like driving to and from work, or at least that's how I used to be, there's no need to write these down. You can just go right over to the website. Everything's right there. But I wanted to start off with talking through my philosophy on the waiver wire. But before we do that, got to get another sip of this Common Cause here. I'm telling you, that's a good one. Anyway, so philosophy, right? I know there's a lot of people out there. Obviously, there's 40 million people in this country that play fantasy football. But there's a lot of people that just, they plug in their waiver. And first, before I even dive in, let's get one thing out of the way and make it crystal clear. Obviously, everybody who's playing fantasy football plays in completely different leagues. Sometimes some people use a rolling waiver list. Some leagues run with a waiver wire order that resets weekly. Some leagues run with a, free FAAB, free agency auction bidding dollars, where you're actually spending money to bidding fake dollars to bid on free agents. So keep in mind, obviously every, league comes in its own different, shape, size, settings, and everything of that nature that makes it different. But generally speaking, I tend to be very, very frugal and conservative with my waiver wire priority and free agent money. I'm basically waiting for somebody who is going to be either a league winner or at least somebody that is for sure or for certain to be in my starting lineup in that coming week or in the coming weeks. I'm not going to use waiver priority on guys that they're just depth adds or nice to haves or guys that would be like cool to have on your team but might not even make the roster. And I know a lot of people that play this game, they're out there, using their waiver priority, just trying to get as many people as they can, not realizing that when you're, first, second, third in line and you're using a waiver priority on a guy that might not even make your lineup, you're putting yourself now at a disadvantage for when the Kenneth Walkers, for example, become available on the waiver wire. So for me, I'm not using priority unless I'm 100% certain that player is going to be in my starting lineup at least once. Okay? Everybody else, I'm more likely to refer to the Tuesday, Wednesday waiver period as Wake Early Wednesday, meaning I like to get up. This is how nerdy I am about fantasy football. I like to get up earlier than usual on Wednesday mornings, make a cup of decaf and just roll through the waiver wire or roll through the waiver pools on all 20 plus of my fantasy football leagues and add players for free after waivers have cleared. That way I keep my priority and then I can still add a lot of guys that I have my eyes on. So, with that in mind, let's dive into some of the players that I have my eyes on, some of the players that are on my radar heading into week 8. And keep in mind, I'm in 20-plus leagues that, all different shapes and sizes. I have one that, we have 30 bench spots, and I have several leagues where there's only 14 bench spots in a 10-team league. So, but starting with quarterbacks, this week there's not any quarterbacks that I would be using any sort of waiver priority on. There's not anybody I would be spending money on. Frankly, it's very rare for me to use priority on a quarterback. The only time I think I've ever done that is actually very recently, was after Tua Tagovailoa threw 6 touchdowns back in week 2. But what I do like to do on Wednesday mornings is, after waivers clear, that's when I like to go over to the waiver pool and pluck my streaming option. So if you don't know by now, I tend to be very conservative when it comes to quarterbacks as well. I'm not usually the guy using a first or second round pick on Josh Allen. A lot of times I'm missing out on a lot of those elite guys, and I like to try and stream my way through the season. Not always, right? I have a lot of leagues this year where I have Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, those guys. But if I end up missing on those guys, then I end up streaming in a lot of my leagues. I'm in 22 leagues this year. I'd say probably somewhere around 8 or 9 of them. Every single week, I'm looking for a brand new quarterback. Now, this week, the number one guy on my list, if he's available, and that's a big if, is Kirk Cousins. So in Yahoo leagues, he's rostered on 80% of teams, right? So chances are he's not available. He's not available in your league, but 2 out of every 10 leagues he's available in, theoretically. Now, on the off chance he is available in your league, Kirk Cousins, he's obviously quarterback of the Vikings. The Vikings are expected to score a healthy 26 to 27 points in Week 8, which is the 5th most on the Week 8 slate, which has 30 teams on it. So they have the 5th highest implied point total out of 30 teams on the Week 8 slate. They're going against a Arizona Cardinals defense that was allowing the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks before Andy Dalton was able to dump 26.5 on them here in week 7. And I'm using week 7 numbers, by the way, because literally as I'm speaking, the Bears and Patriots game is going on, so I don't update the full scope of things until Tuesday morning. But still, Cardinals are giving up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks. That game could and should be a shootout. So Kirk Cousins would be number 1 on my streamer priority list if I have a chance to get him. But again, he's rostered already in 80% of leagues. Next up on that list is Jared Goff. He's rostered in 50% or 57% of Yahoo leagues. Now his Lions, they're expected to score about 23, 24 points or so, which is the 10th most on the Week 8 slate. That game is going to be a possible shootout with the Miami Dolphins. It has a 50.5 over-under, which is the highest on the entire slate. And the Miami Dolphins came into Week 7 allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks entering Common Cause is coming right back up at me. Entering Week 7. So Jared Goff is back on the streaming radar. It's uncomfortable, but he is in the conversation. The last one that I want to mention here is Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston, right? As of recording this, which is Monday night, we have no idea if it's going to be Dalton or Jameis Winston under center for the Saints in Week 8. Neither guy is rostered too much. Andy Dalton's rostered in just 3% of Yahoo leagues. Jameis Winston's rostered in 21% of Yahoo leagues. But the Saints are expected to score anywhere between 23 and 24 points, which is the 11th most on the Week 8 slate. And that game is likely to be a shootout with the Raiders, a defense that's allowing the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. And that was before Davis Mills, of all people, was able to drop 18.08 fantasy points on them in Week 7. So Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, whoever it's going to be, they're in a very good spot, at least for streaming purposes, in Week 8. There's one more quarterback on the list, but for the sake of time, I will leave that in the article, that if you're interested, you can go check it out over there. But I will mention, if you're in a 2-quarterback league or a super flex league, Sam Ehlinger is probably somebody to have on your radar, probably even using waiver priority. I know how desperate times can be in a super flex league in the middle of the season as bye weeks are taking place. So The Indianapolis Colts, if you haven't heard by now, they benched Matt Ryan. It sounds like Sam Ehlinger is going to be the starting quarterback moving forward. Then again, he is a 6th round pick from last year, and frankly, I would rather stream the Commanders defense this week than I would stream Ehlinger against the Commanders. But still, I know how desperate times can get in super flex leagues, and he's at least worth a look if you're in a 2-quarterback league. Hopping over to running backs. Now, running back is, a lot of times it's the only spot where I will be comfortable using any sort of waiver priority. And this week in particular, there's 4 running backs, which is a huge step up from last week, which was 0. But there's 4 running backs that I would have on my radar to possibly use waiver priority on. Number 1 on that list is Michael Carter. Michael Carter is 67% rostered in Yahoo League. So again, chances are he's not available in your league, but if he is worth a waiver claim and worth that waiver priority. Over the last 3 games before he shredded his knee this week, Breece Hall was averaging 20.3 touches, including 3.3 targets per game. Okay, 20 touches a game, 3 targets a game. Michael Carter was the unquestioned next man up before the Jets swung literally like 2 hours ago, they swung a late Monday night trade for James Robinson of the Jaguars. Best case scenario is that James Robinson is just a backup to Michael Carter. Frankly, I doubt that. It's not likely that a team makes a midseason trade and gives up draft capital for a guy that's just going to be a backup. So worst case scenario, I'm thinking James Robinson handles the early down work, the grunge type work, and probably the short yardage work, to be frank. But Michael Carter would also then serve as the primary passing down, pass catching back in the New York Jets backfield. So in other words, best case, Michael Carter becomes a weekly RB2 with upside if James Robinson's just the backup. Worst case, Michael Carter is a PPR flex, which is definitely going to come in handy as bye weeks start to get heavier and heavier. Next week, there's going to be 6 teams on bye. So either way, Carter's at least going to be on the map. He's going to be on the radar for fantasy football every single week. Michael Carter, absolutely worth a waiver claim, a waiver priority. Next up on my list is DOnta Foreman. 50% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Now, Chuba Hubbard started, quote-unquote started, Week 7, but it was actually Foreman who saw the bulk of the snaps. He outsnapped Hubbard 54 to 46%. He had more PPR points with 16.5 to Hubbard's 15.3. He had 17 touches to Hubbard's 11, and he had 145 scrimmage yards to Hubbard's 73. Now, don't get crazy with expectations. The Panthers shocked the world by destroying Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. I don't think anybody saw that coming. I think by all counts, everybody kind of assumed at this point that, frankly, the Panthers might be the worst team in professional football. So don't get crazy with expectations. The Panthers were in positive game script, which will not be the case for most of the year. They're going to be in negative game scripts. There's going to be an ugly committee between Foreman and Chuba Hubbard. But at this stage of the season, if you can get a lead back for the remainder of the season, right? Christian McCaffrey's gone. He's not just hurt and missing a few weeks. He's gone. And as of this minute, 10:30 p.m. on October 24th, DOnta Foreman is the lead running back of a professional football team. That is worth something in Week 8 of the fantasy football season. And frankly, in the next several games, he could get a neutral enough game script that he's still going to get plenty of volume with 2 of the next 3 games being against Atlanta. Next up on my list is Gus Edwards, 44% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Now, Gus Bus, he blew through a few stop signs en route to a 18.6 PPR points on 16 touches, all of which were carries. He got 66 yards and 2 touchdowns here in Week 7. Now, he does have tough matchups on deck with the Buccaneers and the Saints before a bye in Week 10, and then possibly a J.K. Dobbins return shortly after that. So, frankly, it could be really tough sledding for Gus Edwards moving forward, but in the short term, he is a solid rental for those in need of a RB2, RB3 type of pickup, and we know the guy's capable of a couple short yardage plunges as well. Last on that list is of waiver claims that I would consider this week is Tyler Allgeier, 40% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Now, Allgeier played a season-high 62% of the snaps in Week 7, and he now has 44 carries over the last 3 games while Cordero Patterson is on injured reserve. Now, his Falcons are entering Week 8 as 6-point home favorites, which often implies a lot of volume for the lead running back of a home-favored football team. And they're implied to score 24 points, which is going to imply plenty of scoring chances for Allgeier. And they're going against a Carolina Panthers defense that entered Week 7, allowing the 8th most PPR points per game to running backs. Now, Cordero Patterson, he might return in Week 9, but if he does not return in Week 9, then Allgeier actually, he's going to get he gets the Carolina Panthers this week, the LA Chargers next week, who've allowed the 4th most PPR points to running backs, and then he gets the Panthers again in Week 10. So if there's a slow recovery with Patterson, it's entirely possible that Allgeier's a 15-touch running back in good situations for the next 2 to 3 weeks. All right. Other than that, I have, 5 different names on this list that I would not use a waiver priority or a waiver claim on, but they are, 5 different running backs that I would consider adding to my roster after waivers clear. Those guys are Isiah Pacheco, Latavius Murray, Kyren Williams, Rachaad White, and Chuba Hubbard. For the reasons why, for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into those, but for reasons why, please, again, just feel free to go to basementbrewedff.com, click on content, it'll be right there. In fact, if you just sign up for the email list, it'll drop right into your inbox every single week. But those 5 guys are on the list as well. Let's talk about we'll talk about 2 wide receivers here for the sake of time. Again, there's none in the list this week in Week 8 that I would use my waiver priority on. That said, there are 2 guys in particular. I mean, there's 7 guys on this list that I'll be looking to add to my 22 different fantasy teams, but there's 2 guys in particular that are especially high on that list, or they're in another tier, so to speak. Number 1 is Wan'Dale Robinson. So he's 29% rostered in Yahoo leagues, and it seems like Wan'Dale's season is getting underway. It's getting started. He jumped up to a very nice 69% of the Giants' snaps here in Week 7, and he received 8 targets, 6 catches, and 50 scoreless yards. So just 11 PPR points. He didn't go crazy, but it was a very, very good sign that he jumped all the way up to a nice 69% of the snaps and got 8 targets. It seems pretty crystal clear that Wan'Dale Robinson is well on his way to being the Giants' wide receiver 1 the rest of the way. Number 2 on my list is Parris Campbell, 5% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Quick sip. Got to take a quick break here. All right, Parris Campbell, 5% rostered in Yahoo leagues. It's kind of funny because in the first 5 games of the season, he averaged 4.4 PPR points and under 4 targets per game over the first 5 games of the season. Suddenly, over the last 2, his previous 2 games, he's turned in 23 targets, 17 catches, 127 yards, 2 touchdowns, which all equates to 41.7 PPR points over the last 2 games alone. I'm trying to pull up right now live a tweet that I tweeted, I don't know, about an hour ago. Here we go. So, Parris Campbell over his first 5 games of the season. 15 targets, 11 catches, 112 yards, no touchdowns, 22 PPR points. Okay? So 15 targets in his first 5 games, 23 targets in his last 2. 11 catches in his first 5 games, 17 catches over his last 2. 112 yards over his first 5 games, 127 yards over his last 2. He didn't score once in his first 5 games. He did score twice in the last 2 games. And he scored 22.2 PPR points in the first 5, but 41.7 in the last 2. So, needless to say, the arrow is pointing way up on Parris Campbell. He's becoming not just like a relevant piece of that Colts offense, he's becoming a focal point. Now, we do need to keep in mind that, like we mentioned earlier, the Colts are benching Matt Ryan. They're moving forward with Sam Ehlinger, so it's entirely possible that shakeup shakes things up in that wide receiver room, and maybe Parris, who knows? Maybe Ehlinger loves Parris Campbell. Maybe he doesn't look towards him at all, but clearly the arrow is pointing up on Parris Campbell, and I am, if he's still available in my league after waivers clear, he is a guy I'm trying to add to my lineup. And if you're in a deep league or you're, deep benches, deep rosters, I have no issues, no qualms with using a waiver claim on Parris Campbell. The arrow's pointing straight up there. All right, once again, guys, there's 5 other names on this list. I won't get into the reasons why. Again, you can just go over and check out the article if you want to know why. But on this list, we also have Rondale Moore, Josh Palmer, Zay Jones, Marquise Goodwin, and Josh Reynolds. Hopping over to tight ends. As always, there's nobody here that I would use a waiver priority on, but there are guys that I will be looking to stream, right? Typically, my tight end philosophy during draft season is I want elite or basically nothing. I either want Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, and if I miss on those guys, then I'm probably just streaming all year. So this week, who is on my radar? Not really a number 1 or number 2. They're kind of interchangeable here, but the first name I'll mention is Micah Sicky. So Micah Sicky is rostered in 41% of Yahoo leagues. Over the last 2 weeks, he has 14 targets, 9 catches, 96 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So 30.6 PPR points over the last 2 weeks. Now, this week, in week 8, he's going to get a shootout with the Detroit Lions defense that's allowing the 7th most PPR points per game to tight ends. He's a great flyer to take a shot on for anybody who needs a tight end this week. Perhaps more than that, Irv Smith. Irv Smith is also rostered in 41% of Yahoo leagues. He's averaging 5.4 targets per game over his last 5 games, and now this week, he's going to get a possible shootout with a Cardinals defense that's allowed the most PPR points per game to tight ends. So he too is in a great spot. And really with these guys, you're kind of just hoping for a touchdown or some cheap catches, but both Mike Gesicki and Irv Smith are they're in a great spot this week for anybody who's looking for some desperation help at tight end. Last but not least in this list, I have defenses. I'll skip the reasons why, because frankly it's kind of boring and we're already sitting at 23 minutes here. But on my defense list of defenses I'm looking to stream, Philadelphia Eagles, Jacksonville Jaguars, Atlanta Falcons, Indianapolis Colts, and Tennessee Titans. If you're interested in reasons why, once again, just head on over to that article and it'll explain to you in great detail why I'm interested in those. So that's it for today. That's it for the waiver wire week 8 Wake Early Wednesday preview. Moving forward, I'm going to try and bring you a preview of games later this week. On Fridays, I'm going to be trying to drop a podcast that previews the games from a fantasy football standpoint. If you're not familiar by now, there is a weekly resource that I create, and it's kind of how I got my start in fantasy football. It's called the Heat Map. And there's a lot of people that use it for setting their lineups, making tough start-sit decisions, making player prop bets, setting DFS lineups, and inside the heat map is a thorough written, detailed analysis for every single fantasy football player in every single game, every single week. And there's separate tabs, there's separate cheat sheets at the bottom of this resource that also helps you identify. We've talked a lot about streamers today. There's a tab specifically for streamers. So you click that, and there's a list of all the streamers I'm looking at for quarterback, tight end, defense, and kicker. Same thing goes for touchdown regression. There's a touchdown regression tab, a touchdown regression cheat sheet right here in the resource that you click it, and you're going to see right there, right in front of you, which players are mathematically most likely to score touchdowns and which players are mathematically likely to not score because they're over the limit, so to speak. So anyway, that is the heat map. It's got 250 to 300 players written up every single week. It takes me 24 hours or more every single week to put this together. There's 250 plus people using it. Highly recommend checking it out. There's a link to check it out right in this waiver wire article that I've been talking about for the last 25 minutes and 35 seconds. But if you have any questions about that, if you have any questions about Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, if you have any questions about anything that we're doing down here in the basement, please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out. Shoot me an email at mikey@basementbrewedff.com. And come hang out with me on Twitter. I'm over on Twitter all the time at BBFFMikey. Hit me with a follow. Let me know where you came from, and I'll be sure to follow you right back. Other than that, that's going to do it. That's a wrap for today's show. Please, if you've liked anything that you've heard, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, and review. That stuff goes a heck of a lot further for me than you might recognize. Thank you so much for tuning into episode 17, and if you've been here for the other 1 through 16, thank you so much for the support along the way. You guys are helping a guy live his dream, and I can't thank you enough for that. So really, truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Cheers. This brew from Enlightened Brewery, this Common Cause Session Pale Ale. Cheers. This brew's for you.